Welcome to Unmasking the Mic. My name is Ralph Anthony, current stand-up comedian and actor living in New York City. Each week I'll be sitting down with a fellow comedian to discuss how they navigate the world and how being in therapy helps aid them in that journey. Thanks for tuning in. Now let the unmasking begin. Welcome back to another episode of Unmasking the Mic. I am your host, Ralph Anthony, and today with me is a very special guest. He is a veteran of the United States Army. He's also the host of the hit podcast called I Can Steal That. The podcast has now been turned into a book published by Simon & Schuster called Heist, and he just released his first special called PTSD. Please welcome comedian Pete Stegmeyer. Thank you for coming on today, Pete. How you doing?
Oh, I am living the dream. How you doing, buddy?
I am doing all right, my man. I'm doing all right. You are living the dream, and that is not a blanket statement at all. You got to be riding high, my friend.
Yeah, I definitely am living the dream now. Like I wasn't always. I used to say it like kind of like sarcastically or like as false motivation, because in the Army we'd be like false motivation is better than no motivation. But now like things are really good. Like it's like it you got to speak it into existence, but it comes true.
Yeah, I am a big believer in that. Now, to keep people in line with what's going on in the last, I would say 2 to 3 weeks, Pete has launched a book based on his podcast called I Can Steal That. It is now on a number one. Is it the number one bestseller yet? Or are you on the bestseller list?
I was on the bestseller list for Amazon and Barnes & Noble. I checked once on the New York Times bestseller list, and I just felt like such a huge narcissist, like even having the audacity to like type my name in, that I just haven't checked again.
Okay.
I figured somebody would have told me if I got it, so I didn't. But the Amazon and Barnes & Noble bestseller lists were super cool to make.
That's phenomenal, man. I remember seeing the picture of the book being on display in your hometown library. How did that make you feel, man? That's such a wild accomplishment.
Honestly, seeing it on the shelf of like my hometown library, that's probably the most emotional I got like about the book. Like, because I used to spend like whole summers there when I was a kid. Like I grew up in a really, really small town, and like I was always a nerd. So like the library was it. Like I would go every single day and like read a bunch of books and then like bring home like I read like all of the Garfield books. Like I wasn't doing like, research, but like I loved it. And so like getting to see that library is like still going strong, and then that they like put my book and like featured it and stuff like that is just, it's like really cool. And like it makes me hope that like there's like some little kid at the library now that's like gonna pick that up and like maybe one day like find something that like interests him and or her. And I don't know, like it's cool. It feels like now it feels like a legacy, and I realize that that's like very like, I don't mean that in like a cocky way, but it's like, man, like this is like something.
Yeah. Oh, dude, I think it's huge. I think it's amazing. Listen, first off, this was born out of a podcast that it was on a topic that you found interesting, and it's catapulted you into this next level, I think, of life that I can't see it even being fathomable at first. Like when you started your podcast, did you think that it was going to turn into a book deal that's going to turn into a book that actually gets published, to now being on the bestseller list? I mean, there's so many things that just came out of this manifesting and just this belief of these are the dreams that you wanted.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. Like, it's weird because I didn't seek out to get a book deal or to do anything. Like when I started my podcast, I Can Steal That, like 3-4 years ago, I think. And I started making it because like I like true crime, but like, sometimes like I don't want to hear about like murders all the time. Like heists and like scams have always been like my kind of like favorite kind of crimes. Like I think they're like way more interesting, because like you get an art history lesson, you get like whatever. It's not just like it's not just like senseless violence. And so at the time there weren't any podcasts about that, So I'm like, okay, cool. I'll make the podcast that I would want to hear. And then like 3 episodes in, I had to stop because I got a job at the Federal Reserve. And they're like, you cannot talk about how cool bank robberies are while you work at the Federal Reserve. And then I left that job and started the podcast back up. And since then, like, because I think the biggest thing with it too is I was creating something for myself. Like I was enjoying it and it was like growing a little bit, but it was more just like I get to like talk to my friends and I get to, do something that I think is cool. And then a publisher found my podcast and was like, hey, like, would you write this book for us? And then like from there, people were like, man, that's super interesting. And I got to do like some big podcast as a guest to kind of promote the book. And like, it's wild. Like, and now I have like a member of like the world's most famous gang of like jewel thieves, like as a contact in my phone. And like, we might grab lunch at some point. Like it's crazy, but it like really like speaks to the power of like, do things for yourself and like find your niche, and like you're gonna go further with it than you could possibly imagine. Like, don't go out there and say, I want to get a record deal, so now I'm gonna learn how to play the guitar and stuff like that. You have to kind of come from it as I'm making what I would want to listen to or what makes me happy, and then like people are gonna see that vibe with it, and you're gonna go so much further.
Yeah, I think that is such a phenomenal way to look at it and a way of life to embrace. I mean, I think to translate it to stand-up comedy, Bill Hicks once said that you do the jokes that you love. Don't do the jokes that you think the audience will love. And that's literally taking that same mentality and putting it into this aspect of your life.
Oh, absolutely. Like you have to. That's one of the things I really like about like when you do stand up too, because I do the same thing. I think we both like crack ourselves up on stage like pretty regularly. Like, and it's not like, oh my God, this is the funniest thing, but like you have like that fun with it, and you're like, this is what I want to do. Like we're having an experience with like the people in the crowd right now, and it's great. Like I hate when people are like, oh, I hate this guy because he always laughs. Like during a set, like you should be like, if like 500 people are in a room and you're the only one not laughing, like to me that's weird.
Yeah,
you gotta have fun with it.
Yeah, you have to have fun. That's what my father used to say. That's what his golden rule was. Initially, I don't know how on board my dad was with me doing stand up, but he said, listen, if you're going to do anything, just have fun. Remember that it's all about laughing and having a good time. If you get too serious, you're not going to have fun. And then it's going to become a job. And nobody likes going to the jobs. They don't like going to work. So just always remember to have fun, and you'll never not have a good time on stage.
Absolutely. That is it's such a critical lesson.
Yeah, I think as comics and as creatives, we get caught up in the hustle of everything, and we start paying attention to what everyone else is doing, and we let the outside influences dictate how we maneuver in our own careers, when all we really need to do is just stay in our own lane, stay in your lane, keep looking ahead. And that way you'll never be distracted and you won't be disappointed. Yeah, sure. Will things come up? Of course, it's life. But I really am a firm believer in that if you're doing what you want to do the way that you want to do it, you're always going to be enjoying the progress. That's what they always say, trust the process. If you're having fun and you think you're moving ahead, whether it's an inch or a foot or a mile, you're still moving ahead. And that makes it fun. Welcome to my TED Talk.
No, I think that's important. Like, I think a lot of times, because New York City comedy is, it can be a grind. Like it totally can be. And then you like, it's weird. Like if you're not like in the comedy scene, like it's almost like there's like classes or cohorts of like people that kind of start coming up together. And after a while, like, cause you guys like start going to the same open mics, and then sometimes like a year in, 2 years in, depending on the people, like you'll start to see people like getting great opportunities. Like they'll get things like, I know you got like the New York Comedy Festival, like best face or like new faces and stuff like that. And like the breakout series at like Caroline's. And there's like this weird thing where I feel like half of the people get bitter about that. They're like, how the hell did so-and-so get this?
Mm-hmm.
But then like there's the other perspective of like, holy crap, like my friends are doing such cool stuff now. Like it's like I'm at that point now with like friends in comedy where like people will be like showing me a viral meme. I'm like, oh yeah, that's Gus. Or like it's like my friends are making the art that like everybody is enjoying now. And how is that like not just the coolest?
Yeah, that's such a great mentality to have. Like you can't be in this business. You can't be in the business of even life and be bitter. You can't be filled with jealousy and envy. You just can't do it. It's not a great way to live. It's not the way that anyone that wants to live a healthy life should live. And you get to a certain point, and I think it comes with age, experience, maturity, and you have this mindset of you just want people to win. If people work hard, then they should win. The work and the winning has to go hand in hand. Being a good person, the winning, the hard work, it all goes hand in hand. And that's the way this business should be. And I think we get caught up sometimes with people who have the ability to jump and skip steps. You know, if you're able to jump and skip a step that's something that someone else had to go through, then it might potentially make other people bitter to that, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's like a lot of like just gatekeeping that comes out of jealousy, and like all gates do is hold people back. And like if you're so busy like stuck like holding the door, like you're not able to like go beyond that either. Like you're holding yourself back in a way.
Yeah. Oh yeah, 100%. I used to write in my journal how I could never, it took me the longest time to start moving ahead because I was so focused on looking back at what had already happened. There's no way to ever see what's coming into your life if you're busy looking at what just happened.
That's a really good way of putting that.
Thanks, buddy. Thanks, man. Well, I spent 18 months alone in a 1-bedroom apartment. So thank you, pandemic. Thank you, the pandemic perspective.
I'm waiting for like the first guru to come out of like the pandemic.
Oh my God.
I wonder if like a studio apartment is going to be like the new Bodhi tree, and like somebody's going to be like, I'm the Buddha because I was like stuck in the studio.
That's fucking hilarious. That's an idea. That's a great start to a bit, my friend.
I should come up with something for that.
I'd write that down because if I was you and I didn't write it down, then I would forget it. So you got a lot of good things going on, man. You got a lot of good things. There's a lot of positive energy going on in your life. There's a lot of good vibes circling around you. Over the course of this process, how did you feel mentally? How were you able to keep your mental levels in check?
That is a really good question. I think a lot of it came from like number one, trying to manage expectations. I think having like modest expectations for stuff really kind of helped remove the pressure and enhance the joy around things. Because like with my book, like I joked that I like checked the New York Times like bestseller list like once, but I think part of it was like being honest with myself and being like, okay, it's not that kind of book. Like it's not a novel. It's like it's a fun book, and it's it covers a lot of different things, but by trying to make it something that it's not, and like because it's not a novel, it's kind of it's almost like a bedside reader kind of thing where you can read about like a couple heists at a time. Each one is like 2 or 3 pages or something along those lines. Like I think that was definitely part of it, was just being like, you can check all the stuff all the time and be concerned about like your numbers and stuff like that, and most likely be a little disappointed compared to everything else that is like happening, or you can just be really happy that you wrote a book. like, and you know, a bunch of your friends bought your book, and you got these like cool, like, you know, bullet points for your resume, like the best seller, and your library's got it. And it's like one of those things where it's like the number of book sales like is not going to be enough to drastically like increase my income. It's not like everything that I could get out of that was a fulfillment. Like it was just, you know, something like spiritually. And so I was happy with that. I tried very hard to be content with what I have. And like I think that's one of the biggest things. Is just same with like the headlining set that I did at Stand Up New York. I there was a little pressure on that because I wanted to get it right, because it took me, I mean, I've been doing comedy like 10 years or maybe a little over, you know, on and off, like, cause I was in the army and stuff like that. But I started 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my first album. I could have rushed and, you know, put something out that was like, I had 45 minutes of jokes 8 years ago, but it would have been the worst album probably in the history of recorded voice. And so I kind of just waited until I knew what I wanted to say, and then I figured out how to say it in my voice. And so I'm just happy with that accomplishment, and I'm happy that people seemed at the show to really enjoy it. And I don't know, like I think part of it for me is I don't think that comedy is ever going to be my career. In terms of like, I don't think I will ever be like a quote unquote like touring professional stand-up comedian.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, and I'm fine with that. Like it's not because I think part of it's because it's not because I don't think I can. I think I could. But I think that I'm happier now to do it for the love of the game, and to do it because I don't have to worry about like, oh, I need to, you know, book, you know, this gig in Iowa, or I'm not going to be able to like pay my rent, or any of like the extra pressure. Now I just get to do something I like because I like it. And every once in a while I hit a cool milestone, and I can just be really happy with that. Like one day I'm going to get to tell my kids, like, I'm going to like show them pictures of like me and like Jay Jordan and Sarah Cooper and Ralph Anthony, and be like, oh yeah, no, I was like, I knew all these guys. Like we kind of came up together a little bit, and like your dad was cool, and I'll just be really happy with that. Like when I hear people like Matthew Broussard like talk about how he enjoys my joke writing and thinks that I'm a tight writer, like that's like, for me, like I don't like sports, but that feels like you're playing, you know, catch with, you know, with like Tom Brady. It's like, man, I get to do this stuff with like the best people that do it. Like, why would I want to add disappointment to that?
Yeah, I couldn't ask for a better answer. And thank you for the very humbling comment. That's very inspiring. Thank you. But it's so true, though. It's so true when you level your expectations of what you want in the moment. You know, I'm a big fan of meditation, and I listen to Deepak Chopra. I meditate twice a day, once when I first wake up and once before I go to bed. And one of the biggest things that I ever took away from meditating was when you put expectations on something, you're telling the universe that the present moment isn't good enough.
That is a really good way of putting that. I think that is, yeah, I think that's brilliant. Like I always also go back to, I think it was Teddy Roosevelt, I'm not 100% sure, but he said that comparison is the thief of joy. And like that's always like stuck with me. Like if you're happy with something, then it shouldn't matter what other people have. You should just be happy with what you have, and then, you know, hopefully at some point share what you have with other people to kind of, you know, spread that joy out.
Yeah.
But like you shouldn't be upset because somebody has, you know, something better than you. And yeah, so I feel like kind of shedding that has been really good, because when I started out, like I was competitive. I started in Kentucky, like when I got back from like my first deployment, and the only thing I cared about was like the laughter. And I told a bunch of jokes that like were just real hacky jokes, like things that I knew would get a laugh, but like weren't necessarily funny.
Mm.
And it was because I wanted to be like, oh, I can, I can get laughs. I should be, emceeing. I should be hosting this. I should get all these things. And not realizing like, oh, but I'm like not funny. Like they know that I'm a hack. And so that took a little bit of time. But then also, like I wasn't at that point, like I was more focused on metrics and content. And that's not going to get you anything.
Yeah. No, you have to be comfortable with where you are and what you're doing. I think we live in a day and age where everybody wants to speed up the process, get from A to B to C to D to E as quick as possible. And they get to this certain point and they think it's their pinnacle. They think it's the end game, and they'll get to that point and not appreciate anything that went on from the beginning to the end, and when it's your life's work, there is no deadline. There is no reason to rush. Just go through the motions, enjoy the process, appreciate everything that you're going through. And that's what you're doing, that you have this mentality. And listen, you have the potential to go out on the road to tell jokes for a living. You are that funny. You're a funny comedian and you're a great writer. So whether that means you're going out on the road and doing your own stand-up, or you're going on the road to help somebody write jokes and they give you stage time and have you on as a writer, you never know. The possibilities are endless. But I think being open to letting the universe do unto you, if you're willing to let it do unto you, is a very powerful thing. I live in the mindset of the universe is the driver of the car. I am the car. My body, my bones, my blood, my veins, my brain, that's all part of the car. The sleep, the food, the exercise, the mental health that I go through, that's the gas and the oil to keep it going. But the universe is driving the car, and it's going to take the car wherever it wants to go. I'm just along for the ride. And it seems like you have that mindset. You're letting go. And that's the freedom of it. That's the freedom.
Yeah. I really love that analogy. Like I've always thought of it like as a surfboard too, like where like the universe is the ocean and you're out on this board and you see these waves, and after a while, like, are you going to waste all your energy like paddling past that wave because you think maybe a bigger one's coming, or are you just going to jump up and let it carry you and see where you go? Because after, like, if you hit your groove and you like find what you want and you're content in the moment, you can go so far because you're not worried about that next wave. You can always jump back in the water after the ride and try to catch something else. There's no shame in that. But how many like swells are you gonna just waste all your energy swimming through and not go anywhere?
Yeah, that's really.
I don't know if that's how surfing works. I've never actually done it, but I feel like that would be.
Dude, I look at surfing like skiing. I just should not be able to do it. And that's that. Nope, not trying to conquer the elements. I'm just trying to survive through them. But I love I love the analogy. I'm a big believer in understanding that things happen for you. Everything that goes on in your life, everything that has happened to you up until this point has happened for you for a specific reason. And the thing that had helped me go through all the past 20, 25, 30 years of my life is understanding that, and understanding that if I'm happy with who I am today, then I have to be happy and appreciate all the struggles and all the things that I went through to get to this point. Because if you're not happy with yourself now, you're never going to be happy. It's never going to happen for you. So
yeah, for sure.
Now, in that same line of thinking, obviously we have to talk to people. We can't keep all these thoughts. We can't keep everything locked up. so we can journal, we can write, we can go to meditation, we can do yoga. I'm a big believer in therapy. This is a therapy podcast. So how long, being that you are a vet and you've certainly dealt with some issues in the past, how long have you been in therapy for?
Oh man. So I started therapy. I should have started when I was in the Army, but that was at the time, and I mean, still today, a bit like frowned on in the military. Like it's certainly less stigmatized now, but when I was in, like, behavioral health was like going there was a career ender, and so like I ended up going like once or twice when I was in the Army because I didn't care about ending my career because I was at that point I had already like signed a declination statement that said I wasn't going to reenlist, and I like turned down an assignment in Hawaii because I didn't want to do like an extra 3 years in the Army. And so at that point, like I went, but then like the only therapist they had was my direct supervisor's wife. And so I'm like, okay, like I can't really go see you because I'm going to be talking about like work stuff. And that feels like a pretty clear conflict of interest. So I think I started like seeing a therapist regularly about a year after I got out of the Army. So that was 6 years ago. I've been going to therapy now for about 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
I just and I've switched therapists a couple times. Like a lot of people think that you have to do everything with one therapist, and that's simply not true. And that's not helpful for you. It's not helpful for the therapist. When you're looking for a therapist, it's like applying for a job. Like, yeah, you should make sure that that you're going to like work well with them, but you should also make sure that they're going to work well with you and help you fix the things that you want to fix. Like if like you're not going to go to a couples counselor if you're like dealing with like addiction issues. You're going to want to find somebody that specializes, and then maybe during that journey, like with me, my PTSD journey, like I had like really bad like trauma responses in PTSD, and I was able to work through those with a very talented therapist. But once I got a hold on that and I got the tools that I needed to be like, okay, like I'm about to, like I see the spiral coming. Now I know how to like deal with that, but there were other things that I wanted to fix on myself. So I had to, end with that therapist and then find somebody that specialized in like the next kind of work that I wanted to do. I guess the best way to put it is, you're building a house, and so yeah, you gotta get like the people that are gonna like build the walls and stuff like that. Like you need the carpenters to put in the foundation, but the carpenters aren't gonna paint your house. They're not gonna, connect your toilets and do all the plumbing and the electrical work. Like all of those things are gonna require professionals with different sets of skills. And if you have somebody that's only, trained in one area, then you're going to have your carpenter doing your plumbing, and probably not going to go as well as if you recognize that you need somebody else to step in. I just now terminated with my third therapist, mostly because she was leaving her position at her practice to take actually a great job working with soldiers directly. And then I'm going to be moving in a couple months. So I figured that I would just pick up my therapist when I get there, and I can, have somebody that can, practice where I am. So that was a very long way of saying about 5 years.
No, you answered it the right way because you answered it the way that you wanted to answer it. So yeah, with this podcast, it's very free flowing. Answer, don't answer, long-winded answers, thorough answers, short answers, multiple choice. You want me to play true or false? I'll do whatever you need me to do. No, but I like that because it took us on a journey. And that's the whole point of this podcast, because a lot of times people see comedians as either these manic depressives or these happy-go-lucky people, and they never understand that they're two entirely different types of people, but they're also sometimes the same person. And there's a lot of people that are in the middle between the both of them. And so, you need therapy. I think everybody should be in therapy, but as comedians, we need to navigate because we're the speakers of the world. We're the ones that are talking about the real life issues that people might not necessarily want to talk about or feel uncomfortable talking about, or just want to pretend like they don't exist. Like with yourself, I've seen you enough times. You talk about yourself, you talk about your journey, you talk about what it's like being a vet. You know, somebody that lives in New York City that, you know, maybe went to an Ivy League school or did all these other things and lived a very sheltered life, they might not know what it's like to be a vet. You know, like they'll go to a show, they'll see you perform, and they'll have a different kind of perspective. So I think as comedians, we are speakers talking about uncomfortable issues. We're also educators, educating people about uncomfortable issues. And that's the whole point about comedy and therapy, because the both facets of life can tend to talk about uncomfortable stuff. So the whole motto of living I think a healthy, balanced life is to get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I totally agree with that. And I know that a lot of people always talk too about like the role of like the court jester. And like, yeah, you get like all these like cringy dorks that like idolize the Joker, but like we really are to an extent like the jester, because like the jester's job like in medieval courts wasn't just to entertain. It was to give the king the bad news that nobody else could.
Yeah.
And so like a lot of times, like, yeah, he would like dance and act like an idiot, but then like there were a lot of stories in antiquity and stuff like that where the jester would also, because, you know, it's kind of the first observational comedy, they would, you know, meet with the kings and the court like in private and be like, you know, sir, like this is how the people are feeling, this is like what's going on. And they could speak truth to power better than anybody could. And part of that's because they could fucking rap, you know, they could sugarcoat the pill as they needed to, but they could also provide that truth with it. And I think that is always one of like the cooler, like lesser known facts about that. And so now we don't really have kings, but you know, our audience is still people that sometimes need to hear things. And like sometimes when it comes to like mental health stuff, like we've stigmatized things so much. Like most of my comedy, for example, deals with PTSD, because that's my experience. That's, you know, that's the truth that I can speak to. But like when most people I think hear PTSD, like they imagine like waking up like nightmares and stuff like that. But there's so many other symptoms that like they would see in themselves if they were paying attention and knew to look. Like if my wife wasn't a therapist, I don't know that I would have gotten help for PTSD, because I don't know that I would have had it, especially as a guy getting out of the Army, because, you know, what's depression look like in the Army? It's almost impossible to see, because are you tired? Yeah, but everybody's tired because you wake up at 5:30 in the morning. Are you irritable? Of course you are. You're in a stressful environment, but how much of that is environment and how much of that is your mental state? It's impossible to know until like I got out. And for me, I thought I was like really sleeping in, you know, it was like sleeping half the day away. I'd be waking up at like 9:30, but that was so far off of my baseline that it was like, I wouldn't have noticed that it was a problem. Like, but my wife did. And she was like, you haven't showered in like 3 or 4 days. And that's kind of another thing that happens in the Army is like, sometimes you don't shower all the time. Like if you're in the field or you're deployed, like the first 3 months of my first deployment, we got water bottle showers, like meaning we would take like a bottle of Dasani, poke a hole in the top and like rinse ourselves off of it, like on holidays. And so we'd be like, does Columbus Day count? And then we'd like, you know, kind of like clean ourselves because we just didn't have the resources and we didn't have that stuff yet. And so for me, going 3-4 days without a shower, like wasn't like, I mean, it's not great. Like I realized that I like smelled and stuff like that, but like it wasn't as off-putting to me because I had like sometimes gone almost a month without a shower in a totally different context. But that skewed my judgment of it, and it didn't make me think that something was weird. And those are the kind of warning signs that if you don't notice or you don't know to look for, you know, you can catch it when it's like, that's when it's treatable.
Wow. Yeah, I'm so fascinated by literally the last 5 minutes of what you have said, because it's so wild to me. It's so wild. I had no idea that you take showers with water bottles, and that, not showering for days at a time. That's almost normal. Dude, I take 3 showers a day. Like, I love to go work out. I love to get sweaty, love to do stuff outside, but like nothing helps me go to sleep at night than coming home, taking an edible, and then taking a shower. Like, it's magical. The fact that
Oh yeah.
the fact that your wife noticed these things as inherent traits of PTSD is so huge. One, I never even knew that your wife was a therapist. So that's so amazing that you have that resource right there. But also, I have to say, kudos to you for not having your wife as your therapist.
Oh, she doesn't take my insurance, or I would. But
talk about a first world American problem. Jesus.
no, like obviously, like there's a huge conflict of interest, but she was like instrumental in me finding help. Like, because when I got out of the Army, like I was going to college, but I mean, you don't really get paid very much in the Army at all. Like, I think when I got out as an E5, which is a sergeant, my salary was like, I think I was really happy to be making like $24,000 a year. And then I moved to New York City, and like I got very lucky because I used my GI Bill like wisely. And so I was able to, like, I got paid money to go to school, plus they paid my tuition. But I mean, things were really lean and really tight. And so I couldn't afford therapy. And my wife, being a therapist, was able to be like, okay, these are some programs that work on sliding scales based on income. These people, work with vets. And she knew the organizations, because I wouldn't have even known where to start looking. And so that really, really helped me.
That's amazing that she understood that there would be a conflict of interest, but wanted to help you regardless. Just get the help that you need. Now, you said something earlier when you first started talking about your journey through therapy and being in the Army. Obviously, therapy is very stigmatized between both. Therapy is stigmatized across the board by everyone. Why do you think the Army has such an issue with therapy? Why is it looked as such a negative when you realize that you need help?
Oh man, okay. I have some answers for this one.
Perfect. Lay it on me, man. That's what this podcast is all about.
Okay. So number one, I think I have a lot of issues with the Army with this. I think if you want the $100 million answer right off the top of the bat, it's because they know that if they start treating everybody for behavioral health issues that has behavioral health issues, we are not going to have a fighting force anymore. Because a lot of the a lot of the issues with mental health issues, whether it's PTSD or, I mean, like, sexual assaults are rampant in the military, and they're doing absolutely nothing to fix that. And so there's so many different kinds of like PTSD and mental health issues, and you're in a high stress environment all the time. You're not eating, you're not sleeping, you're like, no part of that is like good for your mental health. Like the discipline, like maybe like that, like that's good. But I think if they started like saying, hey, like, let's take care of mental health as much as we try to take care of physical health, that they would very quickly, like, a lot of people, I think, would be like, yeah, I've had like, thoughts of self-harm, and they're like, okay, well, you can't have a gun and you can't be in the military now, so you're out. And I think that first and foremost, there wouldn't be anybody left to serve. And so I think it's a self-preservation thing. I think another part of it is also trying to avoid liability and trying to avoid responsibility and things like that, because like PTSD is covered as, a disability, but it doesn't doesn't pay very much. And yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons. There's this really toxic culture. It's mostly toxic masculinity, but I'm just going to say a toxic culture of leadership in general, to where people think that asking for help of any kind is a weakness. Like a good example of this is when you go to get promoted, like when you're like if you're trying to become a sergeant, which is a non-commissioned officer, you have to go to a promotion board, and it's this big like trial thing basically, where you have to like, do a PT test to like make sure you're physically fit. You have to do a weapons qualification to make sure you can shoot. And like those things kind of make sense. But then you also have to go to the promotion board. And what that is the top enlisted officials from each of the companies in your battalion. So in this case, like first sergeants, basically grilling you about like trivia, or asking you to recite this song or this poem, and like all the stuff you're supposed to have memorized. But the trick to passing the board, they don't care if you get stuff right. They just want to see that you're confident. So if they're like, Sergeant Promotable Stegmeyer, what is 2 + 2? I could be like, Sergeant Major, 2 + 2 is 5. And they're like, are you sure about that? I'm like, I'm positive, sir. And that, like, they want you to act like you're right more than they want you to be right. And so saying that you need help or that you don't have control mentally is detrimental to that image that you're projecting to your soldiers. And that's just trickle down toxicity, because that just gives them the image of don't ask for help, don't like let things get bad enough to where they have to be taken care of because your leg is rotting off, instead of being like, oh, here's some antibiotics, we'll see you in a couple days.
Wow. So it's almost like you were brought up in this culture or this environment of being confidently insecure.
Yeah, absolutely. Like they don't care. And that was like the same thing, like when I was joking about like the false motivation is better than no motivation.
Yeah.
Like that was where I learned that. Wow. And to that, I kind of agree a little bit. Like if you've got something that you've got to do, even if you're not looking forward to like, you might as well like wake up and be like, it's time to like embrace the suck and get this done. Like that's fine. Like sometimes like I wake up and I don't want to work out, and I could roll over and go back to bed, but sometimes I'm like, just get it done. And then if nothing else, like the worst part of your day will be over and everything else will be better. But like, yeah, that doesn't work when it's, I need help with something. And then you're telling people, no, you don't. You're fine. Like you're detracting away from readiness. They make you feel selfish for saying that you need to focus on yourself because, you're letting your teammates down. But like I always told my soldiers, I would much rather get you back in a week or two after, not to say that like obviously like behavioral health sometimes like takes longer, but go see the person. Like I would much rather have you like get the help you need, come back as a better version of you than say, suck it up, we need to do this like training exercise. And then, you do something drastic and you're out of the fight forever. Like that's diminishing returns, and also people aren't commodities, so you should never have to worry about it. I kind of got in trouble a little bit because I did not go through the promotions as quickly as some of my peers because my emphasis was on helping and training my soldiers and not, you're really going to be hurting my promotion board chances if you can't get your 2 mile time down. Like it's you've been limping for 2 weeks, maybe like go get looked at, like, because something's wrong. A lot of the people that I talk to from the Army are like my junior soldiers, like still call me. They'll still ask me for advice. And like, I don't know of a lot of other people that, get calls from people because they were too busy. Like they wanted to be an authority. They didn't want to be a leader.
Wow. That whole military mindset is so strange to me at times, because you would think that someone that has a clear head is a stronger person, to have a full mental grasp of what's going on inside of you seems like that would make you a better soldier. Like I always found that as I look back and how I was living my life, no matter how many times I went to the gym, no matter how much weight I lifted, bench, squatted, deadlifted, whatever, none of it mattered because I was such a frail individual on the inside that the muscles on the outside didn't matter.
Oh, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
it's so strange to me that we stigmatize therapy and that men and military almost see it as a weakness for admitting that you need help with something. That I think that is just atrocious. And it leads into that whole thinking about how prevalent toxic masculinity is. And it's never going to go away unless people start having these hard conversations. And so,
I totally agree. And that just reminded me of one other thing that I noticed in the Army a lot is they were much more likely to refer you to a chaplain, which is like, usually a priest or somebody like that. And that's not to disparage the chaplain corps, because those guys, like, they do a great service to a lot of soldiers. Like, if like we would suffer a casualty, that you could like go talk to the chaplain about like how you're feeling and stuff like that. And they were really, aside from like your closest friends, or if you had a good leader that you felt safe to talk about those things with. But like the chaplain, like I really don't want to disparage them, because like they're doing what they believe to be best. But usually what that would end up being is, I understand these are trying times, of course, like, take a little bit, like try to reflect on it. But it wasn't therapy. And then they would always say, and just like, remember, like God, like, be strong, like put your faith in God. And like that becomes detrimental. I think when they would try to like substitute like religion or spiritualism for legitimate therapy, that seems to kind of be the Band-Aid that they wanted to apply instead of the mental health thing, because then at least the chaplain could, tell them to get back in the fight. So just kind of had that realization. I'm like, oh, that was the Band-Aid they were trying to use.
There was so much information in this interview that we decided to break it up into 2 separate episodes. So be sure to tune back in next week, where we pick up with Pete navigating the Army and his mental health journey. Thank you again for tuning in. I am Ralph Anthony, and I will see you next week. Until then, stay present, stay in the moment, and keep your head up.